My name is Jake, and a few years ago I worked as a night security guard at a small tech office. It wasn't a high-profile company, just some startup dealing with software, data, or something along those lines. To be honest, I never really knew what they did, and they didn't seem too eager to explain. My job was simple. Sit in the security booth, watch the cameras, and make sure no one broke in. Most nights were uneventful. Just me, the humming of the security monitors, and the occasional sound of a car passing outside. But there was one night I'll never forget. A night that made me question everything I thought I knew about that building. My shift started at 9 p.m., same as always. I did my rounds, checking the locks on the front and back doors, made sure the alarm system was armed, and settled into my little security station. It was a small room, barely bigger than a closet, with a desk, a chair, and a wall of outdated monitors displaying the grainy outdoor camera feeds. The office itself was just a long hallway with 3 rooms on one side, a break room at the end, and a storage closet near the front entrance. Nothing fancy. Nothing worth robbing. That's why at around 1 a.m., when I heard a distinct click like a latch snapping shut, my entire body tensed up. I sat up straight, my eyes scanning the monitors. No movement outside, no alarms triggered. The sound had come from inside. I got up and stepped into the hallway. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. The 3 office doors were shut. The break room door was closed. I checked each room, flipping on the lights for a second before turning them back off. Nothing was out of place. Still, something didn't feel right. Maybe it was just my imagination, I told myself. When you sit alone in a silent building long enough, the mind starts to play tricks on you. Shrugging it off, I went back to my security post. But this time I left the door open to the hallway, just in case. 20 minutes later I heard it again. But this time it wasn't just a click. It was the slow, unmistakable creak of a door opening. My heart started pounding. I turned my head toward the hallway and froze. One of the office doors, the same door I had just checked, was now slightly open. A cold, creeping feeling spread through my chest. I knew for a fact that door had been closed before. I had checked it myself. And the security system hadn't gone off, which meant no one had entered the building from the outside. So how was the door open? I swallowed hard and stepped toward it, my pulse thudding in my ears. I nudged the door open wider, my fingers trembling slightly. The office inside was dark, but I could make out the rows of desks and computers, all illuminated by the dim glow of the exit sign. At first, everything looked normal. Then, in the far corner of the room, behind one of the desks, something moved. At first, I thought it was just a shadow shifting, maybe a trick of the light. But then I saw it, the reflection of eyes staring back at me. A man was crouched under one of the desks. He had messy black hair, pale skin, and dark, sunken eyes that looked almost unnatural. His expression was impossible to read, somewhere between fear and pure seething hatred. Like he was both terrified and furious that I had found him. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Neither of us moved. Then he started to stand up. That was all I needed to see. I turned and ran. I tore down the hallway, my footsteps slamming against the floor as I sprinted toward the front doors. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if he was following me. I crashed through the front entrance, which immediately triggered the security alarm. The piercing wail of the siren filled the night air, and I kept running, not stopping until I reached the edge of the parking lot. I turned back just in time to see the office door swing open. The man stepped out, but he didn't run. He stood, there in the dim glow of the streetlight, his face shadowed, just staring at me. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared around the side of the building. When the police arrived, we went inside to check the security footage. I felt a strange sense of relief. I had proof of what I saw, but when we reviewed the recordings, that relief turned to dread. There was no footage of him entering the building. Not a single frame showed a door opening, a window breaking, nothing. It was as if he had always been inside. The company's higher-ups were called in, and the moment they arrived, I could tell something was off. They weren't surprised. They weren't even concerned. If anything, they looked annoyed. "We'll handle it," my boss said, waving off the officers. Nothing was stolen, just some trespasser. But I wasn't buying it. Who hires overnight security for a tiny office in the first place? And why didn't they seem surprised that someone had been living in their building? I had a sinking feeling they knew exactly who he was. Maybe he was a former employee. Maybe he had been squatting in that building for weeks, even months. Maybe he had been watching me from the shadows every night while I sat in that tiny security booth, completely unaware. I stayed at that job for another couple of months, but after that night, I never felt comfortable there again. Every creak, every sound in the dark sent chills down my spine. Eventually, I quit and moved on. But to this day, I still think about that man. Who was he? How did he get in? And the question that haunts me the most: what would have happened if I hadn't found? A few years ago, when I was in high school, something really strange happened. I lived in Los Angeles with my parents and my older sister in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't too far from the city, but it was peaceful. One of those places where the streets were empty at night and you could hear nothing but the occasional car passing by. Our house was a 2-story home, cozy but a little isolated. We had a few neighbors, but their houses were spaced out with tall hedges and trees lining the streets. That weekend, my parents had to go out of town for a wedding. It was too far for a quick trip, so they would be gone for 2 nights. My sister and I had school, so they left us home alone. That first night, my sister had plans to stay at her friend's house, which meant I was home alone. At first, I didn't mind. I actually liked the idea of having the whole house to myself. I could watch whatever I wanted on TV, eat junk food, and not worry about anyone bothering me. Outside, the rain had been falling steadily since the afternoon. It wasn't a storm, just a quiet, steady drizzle that made the streets shimmer under the streetlights. The soft sound of raindrops hitting the windows was oddly calming. I made myself a frozen pizza and sat in the living room, scrolling through my phone and watching a movie. The living room had big windows that faced the front yard. Normally I kept the curtains closed, but since the rain made everything look misty and quiet, I left them open. Around 9 p.m. I heard a knock at the front door. At first, I wasn't sure. I had heard it correctly. The sound was soft but clear. 3 solid knocks. I looked at my phone. My sister hadn't texted me saying she was coming home early, and my parents were out of town. Who could be knocking at our door in the middle of a rainy night? I sat still, waiting to see if it would happen again. Then, another knock. 3 more slow, deliberate taps. A chill ran down my spine. Something felt off. We almost never had unexpected visitors, and especially not this late. Our neighborhood was quiet, and people usually kept to themselves. Even deliveries never came this late. I hesitated before getting up. Instead of going straight to the door, I decided to check from upstairs. My bedroom had a window that overlooked the front yard and the porch, so I figured I could peek outside without being seen. I moved carefully, my heart pounding a little faster. I reached my window, pulled back the curtain slightly, and looked down at the front porch. No one was there. I frowned, scanning the front yard. The rain made it hard to see, but there was no sign of anyone walking away. I looked down the driveway. Nothing. Now I was really unsettled. Someone had knocked, but they were gone. Or worse, were they still hiding somewhere? I stayed at the window for a moment, my eyes darting across the yard, the street, the trees. The rain continued to fall in a soft rhythm, but the world outside felt eerily still. After a few minutes, I finally convinced myself that maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe it was a neighbor needing something, and they left when no one answered. Maybe it was the wind rattling something against the door. Still, I wasn't about to take any chances. I went downstairs and made sure every single door and window was locked. Then, trying to shake the nervous feeling, I went back to the living room and turned up the TV, hoping it would distract me. But I couldn't focus. My eyes kept darting to the window, expecting to see someone standing outside. Every little creak in the house made my nerves spike. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but I couldn't relax. The hours passed slowly. Eventually, around midnight, I heard the front door unlock. I jumped up, my heart pounding, until I realized it was my sister. She walked in, shaking off her wet umbrella and pulling off her jacket. Before she even sat down, she turned to me with a confused expression. "Hey, did you see that car parked down the street?" My stomach dropped. "What car?" She pointed. "Outside." There was a black car just sitting there. I couldn't tell if anyone was inside, but it's been there for a while. I felt a wave of unease wash over me. "Where exactly?" She moved to the window and pointed down the street. From inside, I couldn't see much because of the trees and the angle, but my sister looked concerned. I hesitated before telling her about the knocks at the door. As soon as I did, she got serious. "You're sure no one was there?" she asked. I nodded. I checked. No one was at the door and I didn't see anyone leave. We both looked outside, but the car was too far down to get a clear view in the dark. The rain made everything blurry, and we couldn't see if there was someone. For the next hour, we kept peeking through the window, but the car never moved. It just sat there like someone was waiting, watching. By the time we finally decided to go to bed, the car was still there. The next morning, we checked again. It was gone. We never figured out who knocked on our door that night or why that car had been sitting there for so long. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't a coincidence. To this day, I still wonder, who was outside in the rain that night and what did they want? I grew up in Los Angeles, in one of those older neighborhoods where houses sat close together, and everyone at least recognized their neighbors. My mom used to joke that we had fewer people on our street than in the apartment building we lived in when I was little. It was a quiet area, mostly families and older folks, the kind of place where nothing big ever really happened. Maybe that's why my parents felt safe leaving me and my older brother Jake home alone that night. I was 7, and Jake was about 14 or 15. He was grounded for something dumb. I don't even remember what. Maybe he forgot to do his chores or talked back to Dad. Either way, Dad was serious about it. He had locked up both the house phone and Jake's cell phone in the safe before leaving, making sure Jake had no way to call his friends or go online. Jake wasn't happy about it, and honestly, neither was I. Without a phone, we couldn't call anyone if something went wrong. That night, our parents were going across town to check on my great-aunt, who lived alone in an older part of the city. My grandparents, who usually visited her, were out of town, so Mom and Dad wanted to make sure she was okay. They promised they wouldn't be long and said we could order pizza when they got home. That was fine with me. Pizza was always a good enough bribe. After they left, Jake and I did what we always did when we were left alone. We played video games in the living room, sprawled out on the couch with controllers in hand. The rain outside was coming down hard, tapping against the windows and making the streetlights look blurry through the glass. Every so often, lightning flashed, and the sky lit up, but we barely noticed. We were too busy arguing about whose turn it was. Time passed, and I started to get hungry. I glanced at the clock. It felt like our parents had been gone forever. My stomach growled and I groaned. "When are they coming back?" Jake shrugged. "Dunno." He didn't look too concerned. He was more focused on the game. Then, there, was a knock at the door. Excited, I jumped up, thinking it was my parents with the pizza. Finally. I rushed toward the door, my socks sliding a little on the hardwood floor. Jake sighed behind me. Dude, chill. But as I got closer, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. Through the window next to the door, I could see a figure standing outside. And it wasn't Mom or Dad. It was a man. He was tall and thin, with short, dark hair and a scruffy beard. He looked like he was in his mid-20s, maybe older. I didn't recognize him. In our neighborhood, you at least knew the faces of the people who lived nearby. But I had never seen this guy before. I froze in place, unsure of what to do. My first instinct was to turn around and call for Jake, but instead, I did something weird. I held up a finger, like telling the man to wait a second, then quickly closed the curtain. When I turned back, I saw Jake standing behind me, his face serious. He had seen him too. "What the?" he started to say, but before he could finish, the knocking turned into pounding. The door rattled as the man grabbed the handle and started shaking it. The noise was loud, way louder than it should have been. He wasn't just knocking, he was trying to get in. My stomach twisted with fear. Jake grabbed my arm. "Come on," he whispered. He pulled me back into the kitchen, moving fast. I could hear the rain outside, the wind making the old windows creak. The pounding on the door didn't stop. It got louder, more urgent, like the man was getting frustrated. Jake yanked open a drawer and grabbed a knife. The first one snapped. In his hand, it was one of those cheap old knives our parents never threw away. Without hesitating, he grabbed another, a bigger one, his fingers gripping the handle tightly. I clung to his arm as he pulled me toward the laundry room. It was a small space, just enough for a washer, a dryer, and a few shelves crammed with detergent and cleaning supplies. It wasn't much of a hiding place, but it was all we had. We crouched behind the washing machine, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The pounding on the door kept going. It didn't stop. It got even louder, like the man was throwing his whole weight against it. Jake whispered, "Stay quiet." I nodded, too scared to even breathe too loudly. The house felt different now, smaller, more fragile. Every noise seemed louder, every shadow darker. Then suddenly, the pounding stopped. For a moment, everything was completely silent except for the rain tapping against the roof. Then, we heard it. The front door creaked open. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, footsteps moving through the hallway. Jake tensed beside me, tightening his grip on the knife. My fingers dug into his arm. I squeezed my eyes shut, holding my breath. Then, we heard a voice. "What are you two doing down there?" It was Mom. I opened my eyes and saw her standing in the kitchen, holding 2 pizza boxes, looking at us like we were crazy. Mom set the pizzas on the counter. "What's going on?" I tried to speak, but the words came out all wrong. Jake managed to get the story out, how a man had been banging on the door, shaking the handle, trying to get in. Mom just laughed. "Oh, that guy?" she said. "Your dad's outside talking to him. He's a mechanic. He was asking about the old car in the driveway." Jake and I exchanged a look. The car didn't even have a "for sale" sign on it. Why would someone come by so late in the middle of a storm just to ask about it? Mom must have noticed our expressions because she added, "He didn't mean to scare you, he said he was sorry." She hugged us both, promised that next time the phones wouldn't be locked away, and then started opening the pizza box like nothing had happened. Jake and I sat at the table eating, but neither of us said much. As a kid, I believed my mom. If she said the guy was harmless, then he probably was. But now that I'm older, I can't stop thinking about that night. Why would a grown man pound on the door like that? If he just wanted to ask about a car, why didn't he leave when no one answered? Why come so late in the rain? The more I think about it, the more I realize how lucky we were. If my parents hadn't come home when they did, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. Jake was brave that night, braver than I was. But we were just kids. If that man had gotten inside, we wouldn't have stood a chance. I don't know who he was. I don't know what he wanted. But something about that night was wrong, and that's the scariest part.